the absolute bare minimum of carbohydrate that you want to be consuming every single hour from the first hour is 60 grams in an hour, right? And that's the minimum requirement. Like, and if people may be able to go higher than that, and we'll talk about like when and how that makes sense. The minimum is 60. So if you're going to go 4 hours, it's 240 grams of carbohydrates. So like you got to figure out how to get all that in. And the honest answer is, unless you plan it out, that is not going to happen. There's zero chance that you're consuming that much.
Right. Welcome back to Michelle and Mikki's Performance Podcast. How are you doing, Michelle?
I'm hanging in there.
Hanging in. Yes. Yeah. We chatted about that earlier. I'll come up with a different intro question, I guess, for our times.
Yeah. In 2025, we're not asking how you're doing anymore. We're all doing the same, and we're all hanging in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so our topic today, we're going to chat about fueling for the ultra endurance events, right? So like that, it could be ultra running, could be long gravel rides, could be long channel swims. But when you're going, and if we define ultra, like let's just do our own, maybe there's probably a definition of ultra out there somewhere, but like for the sake of our conversation here, we're going to define ultra as like, let's say anything lasting longer than like 4 hours. What's that?
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Running, it would be like more than a marathon. However, there's caveats because some marathons run like an ultra because they're very hilly trail, they're going to take longer than a traditional road marathon.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then for cycling, what would you say would be an ultra?
That's what I mean. I just feel like longer than 4 hours because like what I'm looking at when I'm thinking about like my recommendations for fueling and hydration and sodium and like all those factors to like help you keep going, right? Help you sustain energy for the long haul. I feel like the physiology after about 4 hours really shifts. And so like, does it matter if you're running or biking or swimming, or does it matter how long you've been or like the distance that you're covering? I feel like it's more about the time, right? The time that you're out there. If you're specifically, then we're talking about events lasting more than 4 hours. So this could even be like 70.3 Ironman, 100-mile gravel rides, 100-mile road rides.
Right. Yeah. And I think we'll discuss, there's probably variations in the ability to fuel. For example, if you are channel swimming, right, you're going to have different potentially fueling. I have coached ultra swimmers, but not in their specific events. Like they've come to me as saying, oh, I did a 10K, I've done a 10-mile swim, whatever. And they will describe to me their fueling strategies, which is dependent on their kayaker, right? Like maybe you could have like a buoy or something, or like a floaty, right? Like with all your stuff on it. I don't know. But specifically, I'm thinking of running, right? Like it's different. Your GI system it's different, right, than riding. And so there might be different considerations, which we'll get into. But I think. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, because what we're going to do here is we're not going to be like, here's exactly what you should eat and drink and when and blah, blah. Like what we're going to talk about, or the way I would like to frame this is like helping people understand the physiology and like the energy that their body's using and some like big picture concepts that like, if you know and think about it in this way, then when you're going about planning your own fueling and hydration strategy for the event that you're doing, you can take these concepts into consideration and then read labels and plan accordingly, right? To go like that long. Yeah. And so specifically this came about because I had an athlete or a friend of mine yesterday saying like, just figured out that we had a podcast and was like, oh, hey, have you done one on, like fueling for ultras? And in my mind, I'm like, oh, actually I told her, I go, we talk about that all the time. Let me find the episode. And then I was like digging through all of our past episodes, which we've done 23. This is number 24. So like proud of us for we're modeling consistency here. But yeah, I was like, oh wow, none of them are actually called fueling for, endurance or ultra events.
Yeah.
Anyway, so where I want to start with this is essentially there's lots of ways to screw it up, like fueling, right? Tons of ways to screw it up. But the most common way that I see it screwed up is that, and this is largely talking about like amateur athletes who are like, we'll call them like weekend warriors, like people who are just out, like, I just want to complete the event and like do it for fun. I'm not trying to qualify for a world championships. Like I want to do this long ultra event and enjoy myself and have fun and finish feeling reasonably good. Those athletes do not have a really solid fueling plan. And if you were to ask those athletes at the end, like, how many grams of carbohydrates did you consume while you were out there? We'd be like this blank look on the face because it's not something that they really considered. And they're like, no, but I was feeling like I went to all the aid stations. Like I had a gel. I mean, I had a couple of gels along the way, and like I stopped at aid stations and I was eating like things that sounded good there. And so in their mind, they're fueling, but they're not being very specific about it, and they're not being super intentional about it. It's just more of like this vague idea of like, I know I need to fuel, and so I'm gonna fuel, but then like, because there's not a specific plan going in, they do the thing and then it didn't work. Whatever they did, they're like, I don't know. It didn't work. Because like either you felt really bad or you felt nauseous and you were puking. I mean, there's lots of ways to like screw it up. But then because there wasn't a specific plan that you can go back and be like, here's exactly what I did. It makes it really hard to say, well, like, let's review and see if we can figure out how to tweak what you did, because they don't even really know exactly.
Right.
Does
Well,
that
and
make
I think
sense?
it's yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's also this component of it's very difficult to deconvolve your fueling from your fitness. And what I see a lot is that athletes will immediately jump to it's the fitness instead of it's the fueling, right? Because the fueling is just like something that maybe I should do, or I don't know. And if even if I'm trying to get them to be really focused on their fueling, right, it's still not as people don't think it's as important. But when you get into ultra events, events over 4 hours and sometimes even shorter than that, I mean, you need to, I always encourage people to, if your fueling is rock solid, then you go to fitness, right? Like then you go to what do I need to tweak? But so often I just see people, oh, it's my fueling. I don't know. My legs were just trashed and I don't know why. And, maybe because they didn't puke or they didn't get the bonk, but they just felt bad. And so then ultimately they blame the fitness, right? When the reality is like they didn't fuel. And so it doesn't matter what they do fitness wise to the next event, leading up to the next event, or how they execute the next event. If you don't solve the fueling, then your performance is likely going to be pretty similar. Now, you might be able to get away with more or less stringent fueling if your fitness is very, very high, right? Like you have more room for error there. But, a lot of people, the amount you can build before your next event is, not usually that much, right? Like, especially if you're a working age group athlete with family and this and that, and, the expectations that they place on themselves might be quite high. But the reality is such that, like, yes, hopefully you will make some fitness gains, but you can also significantly elevate your performance if you just focused on your fueling. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I would say, I
Yeah,
mean, I absolutely made that mistake a lot when I was training long. And I mean, and to be fair to myself, like, I don't feel like we really knew as much about like fueling and
how much you
hydration
need.
10, 15 years ago. Like, we just didn't know as much. So I'll give myself like a little bit of some grace
Yeah,
there.
right, right.
And regardless, we should all be giving ourselves grace all the time on these things. Is there like a know better, do better, kind of scenario? But for sure, there were like looking back now, knowing what I know now, there were a lot of times where I was just bunked and I interpreted it as my fitness is not high enough. And so I just need to train more. And there is something to be said for that. Like the higher your fitness level, the more you can fudge the feeling part of it. If your fitness level is not that high, or you're really like, the event you're doing is taking your fitness absolutely to the limits of where you're currently at, then fueling becomes just absolutely imperative. I will say that even as we say this, there are times where like there's no amount of gel that was going to give you the fitness to do the event, like if you hadn't trained for it. So like while we're talking about fitness and fueling, like they absolutely both go together in a way that like you can't just not train and then carb your way through an ultra marathon,
Right.
right? Which I'm not saying anybody's doing that, but like that's an extreme example. But like there are times where it's like, yeah, you consumed as much fuel as you could have and you still died at the end. That's likely a fitness issue, right? But if you died at the end and you didn't eat enough, then I would say like look at the fueling first, right?
I've also seen it to be on the more positive, not this, I mean, this, when you don't fuel and you don't have the fitness, then yes, that things go very badly in the event. But I've also seen the situation where I have had an athlete, or this has happened several times, they weren't carrying the fitness. And we talked a lot about, we know where you're at, right? We know where you would like to be, but that's not reality, right? And we have to fuel this so well, right? Like, I mean, everything has to go into focusing on continuing to fuel because we know that you're going to be at your limit. And I've had athletes do fantastic. They've surprised themselves, right? And they've negative split the back half of a 70.3, right? You know, they got off the bike, legs felt like shit, kept fueling, kept fueling. Second half of the race faster than the first half, right? That, and they didn't have the fitness to solely on the fitness, right? I mean, they did, right? Because they were able to execute. But if they had been negligent on their fueling and their fitness is where it was, the result would have been much different. So it
Yeah.
really does
Yeah.
matter a lot, you know. So
Yeah. And yeah, I can hear your dogs. Like, are they playing or are they snoring?
yeah, sorry. Well, interesting. Oh, this is an aside. No, she's up and about. She was napping, but now, of course, she might be wanting to
She's awake and
play.
like,
So, anyways,
like play with me. I can hear her. It's funny.
yeah, of course.
Um,
I'm on a
okay,
podcast.
so like,
Yeah.
let's dive into some specifics here because like this is what people probably want to know. Like, so the number one thing that I am going to suggest that people do is get in the habit of reading labels of the products that you're consuming. Right? Read the labels and not just total calories, but look specifically for grams of carbohydrate. Right? Like grams of carbohydrate. How many carbohydrates are in all like? And so if this goes for like the powders that you're putting in your bottles that you're drinking, right? Because like some will have very few carbohydrates, some will have like 15 grams of carbohydrates, and so you're thinking like, is that a lot? Is it not? Some will have 90 grams of carbohydrate like in one serving, so like obviously very different. A Cliff Bar is going to have like 35 to 40 grams of carbohydrate. Reading those labels so that you know exactly how many carbohydrates are in that product is going to help you use that product correctly, right? Because there's tons of different products out there. And the reason that there's different products out there is because different athletes have different needs depending on how long you're going, how hard you're going, what the conditions are. Like, is it super hot or is it going to be colder? And so your needs are going to vary somewhat depending on several factors. But since we've talked specifically about like we're talking about endurance events that are over 4 hours, then like regardless of your fitness or your intensity, at that duration, the absolute bare minimum of carbohydrate that you want to be consuming every single hour from the first hour is 60 grams in an hour, right? So if you're going to go for, and that's the minimum requirement, right? Like, and if people may be able to go higher than that, and we'll talk about like when and how that makes sense. The minimum is 60 grams. So if you're going to go 4 hours, it's 240 grams of carbohydrates, right? So like you got to figure out how to get all that in. And the honest answer is that unless you plan it out, that is not going to happen. There's zero chance that you're consuming that much if you don't plan it out ahead of time, or if you're only using aid stations and it's just like whatever I feel like at aid stations, there's zero chance you're getting in that much. It can go above that if you're working harder, or if you have high performance goals and you want to be able to push really strong. You can go up to, and we'll say 90, because I don't think that there's probably very many people who are listening to this podcast. Like, so there are like professionals who will go up to like 120 grams per hour. I think some even more than that, like 140 grams per hour. Those are pretty special cases. And so I'm not going to be in the boat recommending 120 grams of carbs per hour for anyone who's likely listening to this podcast, right? So, I mean, I'll still cap it at like 90 an hour, I think is about max. But keeping in mind those numbers, like drill them into your head and then start practicing that on your long training days, reading labels, adding. And so some of it might be, and then there's a lot of different ways to get in those like 60 to 90 grams per hour, right? Like you can have some of the new, like a scratch high carb or the precision fueling and hydration. Like there's a new flow gel that has like, that's like 300 grams of carbohydrates in like a single pouch. And so you're like, great. If you were going for 4 hours, you could take one of those pouches and like, that's your carbohydrate for all 4 hours. And you like if you were the kind of person that was like, that's fine for me. I don't need anything extra. I don't need to taste anything. I don't need to chew anything. I don't need to feel anything different in my stomach. That might work for you. That's what some of the pros did at Kona. Like when they told us about their fueling plan after, I mean, the woman that won Kona took in 2 of those flow gels. So she had 600 grams of carbs on the bike. And by the way, that bike was like 4 hours for her, maybe a little over 4. So, she's in that like top range. But if, however you do it, as you're practicing and training, read the labels, decide what you're going to take. So if you want to have like, two Cliff Bars and two gels, that would be like 80 grams of carbs for the two Cliff, and probably 50 for the two gels. So there's 130. Like that's going to get you through about 2 hours, right? Then you could supplement that with what the powder that's in your bottles. And so how many scoops? So like, some of this requires working out math, right? Because like there's some powders that will say like serving is 1 scoop or a serving is 2 scoops, right? And so like in the serving, there's 40 grams, but that's 2 scoops. Then there's 20 grams per scoop. So then you can like modify how much powder you put in your bottle depending on how many grams of carbs you need. And so it is a matter of that's where your job as the individual athlete comes in, because like I don't actually care. Like I don't tell my athletes like this is exactly what you need. A couple of them I have done it, so I don't want to lie here. Sometimes I've been like, this is exactly the product that you're going to buy. You're going to put 5 scoops of this in everybody. Like the ones that I know are like just not going to do the math on their own. I'll do the math for you, and this is what you're going to do. But for the rest of you who are listening, like it is this is your responsibility. This is your part. Read the labels, figure out like what products you like, and then train with them and start adding up the math on it, and then start figuring it out. And if you go for 4 hours and you took in 240 grams of carbs, and you know that because you planned it out beforehand, and then you did the thing and you felt great at the end, super, you found your formula that works, right? And if you didn't feel good enough, you could always try more, right? And if you felt like it was wrong, like it was like too much, you felt sick, or you felt like, oh, that was like, that's where we can start troubleshooting. And typically, and I'm curious where you would go with this, Mikki, but like there's two things for an athlete that says, and I'm sure you've heard this before, like it was just too sweet. Like I didn't want to take in any more sugar. My stomach was like, none of that sounded good. Like the sweet just made me want to vomit. Like I didn't want to take any of that anymore. There's two sort of troubleshooting directions that I would go with that. Number one is we would look at your hydration level, because there needs to be adequate hydration in order for your body to absorb. Because you can there's a difference between consuming carbohydrate and your body absorbing carbohydrate, right? So like those are two different things. And so you want to be consuming carbohydrate that is easy for your body to absorb, right? So it can use it. Also with the understanding that our physiology requires fluids in order for your body to absorb those carbohydrates. So in the case that you are dehydrated because you're not drinking enough, then your body, even if you're taking in normally easy to digest carbohydrate, you might feel sort of sick or like, I don't want to take in any more because your hydration level isn't high enough. So like that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is I would say, look at the type of carbohydrate that you're taking in. And this is where we can get like really nuanced with it, because there's lots of different types of carbohydrate, and some of them are easier to absorb than others. And so like if you go to a 7-Eleven and fill your bottle with one of those, the high C fruit, like the fruit punch or whatever, like you go to the fountain and you fill your bottle with that high C fruit punch, like that stuff is just like basically straight fructose, I think. And there is a genuine limit of how much your body, and if there's like different transporters that your body's going to use to absorb fructose versus like glucose or maltodextrin. And you can make yourself sick on fructose real quick, like if you overdo that. And so sort of just being careful about the type of carbohydrate that you're ingesting, because I would say personally for me, I've been doing this for 30 years. Like I would say I could pretty much like a gut of steel. Like there's very few things that make me sick. But if I were to drink that, like if I went for a long bike ride and drank that like fruit punch shit, like I would feel ill the entire time. Right. Like, so that absolutely is a thing. Like the type of carbohydrate you're consuming will make you
Well,
sick.
and I think, and there are some ratios of like, yeah, fructose to glucose, sucrose to maltodextrin, and ultimately, and I don't remember the ratios off the top of my head, in terms of like what people can absorb most readily. But what you need to take away from that is that a combination of different types is usually the best for absorption, especially over long distances. So yeah, if you're looking at doing a 7, 8, 10, 30 hours, right? Like you having a varied source is key for your being able to digest the carbohydrate. And then there are differences in gut microbiome, and I'm not going to get into the sciencey of this, but I know I've had athletes and friends that have gone and done like GI gut microbiome tests that identify they actually don't absorb certain types of sugars as well as others. And that's why if they're taking, I'm trying to remember the old like Osmo or the old, whatever, there were some drinks out on the market that were just one type of sugar. They didn't digest that sugar very well at all. So every time they drink it for an Ironman, they were vomiting. If they switched up to scratch, the other type of, hydration on the market, no problems. I mean, literally sometimes, but we wouldn't have, because that type of drink, was very popular at the time. The only way they'd figure that out was by going and doing testing, right? And so a lot of athletes will push back, oh, I don't need to do that. If you don't want to go do testing, fine, but then try something else, because it's not that you just can't drink. It's that maybe that drink is not working for your gut microbiome. Yeah, so that's my only two, my, varied sources, of the carbohydrate. And then you might have a sensitivity if you're finding that you're just not able to digest, or you're feeling sick, or you're actually vomiting, from whatever it is that you're taking in.
Yeah. So I actually do know some of those ratios that you were talking about. Specifically, and it's because there's like different transporters. So as your body's absorbing the carbohydrate, there's like one transporter, I think it's like GLUT5 or GLUT4, so I don't know, something like that, that is transporting glucose. And your maltodextrin, like all maltodextrin, sucrose, glucose, like it all goes in that category of glucose. Like it's the same transporter for that one. Fructose has its own transporter, and that one that absorbs about 30. So where we get 90 is like 60 grams of glucose, 30 grams of fructose, and there's your like combined 90 grams per hour. So if you're trying to like mix it, the way that we're mixing up sugars is because of like, in the way that there's a really good analogy that was explained to me one time about like the transporters and like what does that mean, because it can sound sciencey and like going like over your heads, but like imagine that you were going into a high-rise building and there was like one elevator, right? And you're trying to stuff all these people into the elevator, and at some point you put too many people in the elevator and it gets weighted down and it's just like not going to go anymore. But if you had two different elevators, then you can put some people in that elevator and some people in the other elevator, and then you can get more people to the top of the building quicker. And that's what we're talking about with the different transporters and mixing up the different types of sugars. It's like putting the sugars on different elevators, right? Going to like into our tissues. So thinking about that way, I would say that the new fuels, and this is a note specifically, it's like this part of the conversation, like I want to talk specifically, and I'll say to like people like me, but I don't even mean like, so like I'm a coach, so like I stay up on all of the very latest, like, whatever the newest trends or like whatever is coming out, right? Like I know what those things are. There's a lot of like old timer athletes, right? Who've just been doing this for a long time. 15, 20 years you've been an endurance athlete. And so you're like, I have my thing, like this is how I always do it. And like not interested in changing or like updating the information that they have. And, I feel like understanding the advancements that have been made in some of this technology and to be honest, I don't understand exactly what the technology is or how they're like manufacturing these high carb products, but I've used them enough to know that they are absolutely different. And the reason I know that is because I bought a cheap one time. So like if you go with like your Morton scratch high carb, Precision Fuel and Hydration has like a high carb one, like that flow gel thing. Like there are scientists in labs that are trying to manufacture carbohydrates in a way that makes our stomachs absorb them very quickly and easily with like not a lot of upset. These are not the same people that are in the labs developing that high C fruit punch that's just trying to like taste really sweet that's in like the 7-Eleven. Like these are different things. And so when you haven't tried the highly processed carbohydrates that are good for the endurance events, and you think I can't take in carbohydrates a lot because it makes me sick, the first thing I would say is like, open your mind to these new products because they genuinely are much easier on your stomach than some of the older products. And they do cost more, which is a barrier, right? So for some people will look at like the cost of a bag of scratch high carb and be like, oh, $40, what? Like I'm not buying. And I fully understand that too. And there was a product that was advertised to me on Instagram, and it said it was like the same thing as like the high carb ones, but it was like, but look, half the price. And I was like, well, that sounds great, right? Like I'm in half the price. So like I bought the cheaper sugar fuel, whatever it was. and it was not the same at all. Like I said, like I don't get sick on the other stuff. And when I tried it, and I feel like, I don't know, do we get in trouble if we name like nobody's listening to this anyway? I get to name the product. The product was called like Formula 369. And the idea behind it was like, if it's like, I think it was like 30 grams of carbs per scoop. And so you have the flexibility, like you can decide if you want 30 grams, 60 grams, or 90 grams, depending on if you're going to use 1, 2, or 3 scoops in your bottle. And so I was like, oh, that's perfect. So I was using it at the 2 scoop, like, right. So 60 grams in a bottle, which shouldn't have been like crazy high. Like in theory, this company says I could put 3 scoops in, and 2 scoops of that made me physically ill. And I would say 60 grams of like a scratch high carb or the Martin, I can get 80 or 90 in a bottle with Martin and it doesn't hurt me at all. And this stuff, there was no chance I could have had 90. So like the type of sugar matters. And unfortunately, the cheaper stuff is likely the stuff that's going to make you ill. And so if you're trying to save money on it, and your experience is that I have a lot of GI upset, or I just feel really sick when I take in that much, it's likely the type of carbohydrate that you're consuming that is the problem, not the total amount, if that makes sense. Like if you switch up the type, you're more likely to be able to handle that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I totally agree. What I was going to say is, well, there's a couple things. So 4 hours, definitely ultra, right? I guess I'm thinking of both the athletes I've worked with and my own experiences. Like, okay, so Ironman, right? For me, PR 10:30, around the 10 to 11 hours time frame, pretty consistently across all the Ironman races that I did. I could do whatever it took, right, to get the carbohydrates. And I was actually a little bit lower, but I did the testing to know like what I was burning at what intensities. And maybe that's the point, is like, even though we're talking ultra distances and ultra, time, there's still variation in what you can hold for 10 hours versus 4 hours versus 30 hours. The higher intensity you're at, the more you're burning and the more you need to take in, to a certain extent, right? Like if you're going to do a 100-mile race, running race, trail race, and you're going to be most likely, zone 1, zone 2 for a lot of that, unless you're, of course, an elite, and those guys are and girls are putting out insane times, right? In terms of like what they're able to hold for these huge, long distances. But you're going to be at a much lower intensity than, say, if you were doing a 50-mile race. And so I guess I just want to know your intensities, right? Like, you
Yeah.
not. Go ahead. Sorry.
And I was going to say, and by the intensity, because what we can't do is equate that to speed or pace, right? Because it varies so much with intensity, what we're talking directly about is like a percentage of your current right now threshold, and how high of that, how much of that are you using, or how high is like, the higher your threshold, the faster you can go before your intensity is really higher. But if your fitness is not that high, then relatively, even if you're going kind of slow, your intensity can still be measured as being high because the fitness just isn't there. And so the way that I would define or help you understand your intensity is specifically by how hard are you breathing, right? So like if you're breathing really quietly and easily and like slowly, like your breathing is not elevated in breaths per minute or like really in depth, then that's an indication that you're not using tons of carbohydrate. And so if you're walking, say like you're going to go out and you're going to walk a marathon, and that's going to take you probably 7 or 8 hours, right, to walk a marathon. You would not need to be taking in 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour to walk a marathon, because you wouldn't be using that much. And your breathing for most people, would be very quiet throughout that whole thing. But as soon as your breathing is elevated, that in and of itself is an indication that your body's using glucose to fuel the work that you're doing, right? So when we're measuring intensities, I'll let you go back to like with your thing about intensity, but use your breath to understand the degree of intensity that you're using, and note that as soon as you're breathing like that, your body's using glucose to fuel the work you're doing, right? But if you're breathing quietly through your nose, you're likely not. And you watch like the fastest, even like your pros that are going really hard, a lot of times they look like you can't even see them breathing. And that is a testament to their fitness level.
Yeah, so that was the first point that I was going to say is, so for 4 hours for a lot of folks is like a marathon, right? Like an open road marathon or 70.3 or the 100 mile if you're a professional woman for an Ironman racer, 100-mile bike. So where I'm going with this is when I've crewed or when I have done big trail, I've actually haven't done a trail race. I did a 50 miler, but it's been over a decade. That's a story for another time in terms of like, will you go back to trail running? It's like the idea of having people on a trail with me actually makes me irritated, like just thinking about it. Like when I go to the mountains, I want to be by myself. So the idea of surrounding myself
Yeah.
with people, no, not so much. But I do a lot
Paying
of
money to
solo.
do it.
And paying money to do this. No, aid stations are not worth it to me. I can pack my own stuff. But even when I've crewed for folks and I've crewed people that are just trying to make the cutoff, right? The 30-hour cutoff, for example, Leadville, and I've crewed for folks that are going to go for the big gold belt buckle, right? I think that's under 22 hours, 20 hours. I don't know. Pointy end, right? Very, very fast in with respect to a 100-mile race. Still 20 hours, right? Or thereabouts, or 30 hours. I have never, again, I won't say never, but I have never had experience or seen evidence of any of the products working for that amount of time. Almost everyone will need something else at some point. And the best feedback I've gotten as a coach was, thank God you told me to get other things to eat, right? Because when you're out in the trails or, and some trails aren't very remote, but when your fueling goes south, you need to have something else on board because you can't actually get from point A to point B if your point A to point B is like 50 miles or 100 miles without fueling on board. And yes, aid stations are great, but you want to make sure that you have options. And so what I tell folks, and this is primarily again for runners, is yes, do exactly what we're saying to calculate what you're going to need and have things on hand that you practice with, that work very well for you, and then have plan B. And plan B might be peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Plan B is usually some chicken soup or some sort of salty soup, chips, pretzels, stuff you would normally find in an aid station, but maybe you're packing in. But even with the really high quality stuff, when you're trying to fuel with that for 30 hours, or and for hard rock, I don't remember what the cutoff is. I've never crewed hard rock, but it's longer than that, right? And so I've not seen too many people say, "Yeah, I did that all in gels." Like it just doesn't, that's not reality. So you need to have, and mostly people will have like their primary, like what they think they're going to need, whether it's blocks or gels or drinks or whatever, and then they're going to have like the real food. Unless of course we're talking about the super elites and they might be doing just, because they're doing it in half the time, so it's not saying they're not burnt, but yeah, they're doing, Leadville in 20 hours or less. I think now, I can't remember what the recent course record is, but it's insanely fast. And so they might be able to get away with doing it all on like super high carb, fancy products. But yeah, I guess my piece of advice is like, have your plan B and plan C, and usually solids, especially if you're kind of going to be skirting with the cutoffs and you're going to be out there for a long time. The other thing with a lot of the hilly terrain races, a lot of vertical, is that even if you're hiking, you're probably in zone 3, zone 4, right? If you're scaling a 13,000 foot mountain and you're at 12,000 feet, like there's no way you're in zone 2 and zone 1. Like you're breathing hard and you're burning a lot of calories. Now, when you start to descend, you might be in zone 1, but you are also taking care of your body, to not induce too much muscular fatigue too early in the race. And that's a subject which we're going to tackle on another podcast in terms of like, maybe how do you transition from doing triathlons into ultra racing in terms of training? But yeah, so I guess that's my guidance, I guess, for if you are fueling, and it's run specific because our guts are a little more finicky when we're running because of the mechanical jostling of our guts. When I have my athletes that are doing big multi-day cycling adventures, not as much of a problem, right? I still advise like having a plan B because doing, like I've had some athletes that do like big 5-day events, and like you just don't want to have the product in your system for that long. Like you want to have some real food. And I encourage that. So, having your thing that you can go to start off with and gets you close to what you think you need in terms of carbohydrate, and then have some alternatives, right? And I love when athletes will say, yeah, I went to the gas station and I had like an ice cream cone and then I had like two Snickers bars and then and like it wasn't high quality. I'm like, it doesn't matter, right? Like when you are burning this much fuel and this many carbohydrates and you're just, burning through it, like you can eat literally whatever you want. It's free calories. And of course, I encourage folks to then focus on high quality food, after the ride or run or swim. But yeah, I'd love to hear. I know you've coached some long distance
Yeah.
swimmers. And so what are
Yeah.
those
Well,
folks doing? If you, yeah,
okay. So,
if you
yeah,
have
so
some
there's
information
two
about that.
things. I absolutely, because what you just said reminded me of the channel swimmers, and I'll tell you like what that is. But before we even go there, I want to, what you were just alluding to, it leads right into like our guts are trainable, right? Like you can train your gut. And there was an Ironman athlete. I had an athlete that I worked with this year who it was like her first Ironman, and she did great. Like we were really stoked, happy for her. There was it's sometime like early on in the summer. I don't know, like one of her notes that she wrote back was something along the lines of like she ended up missing a run because like she had it in her head that she couldn't run on a full stomach, right? Like if she'd eaten, she needed to wait, like she couldn't go running right away after because her stomach would feel bad. And so she like skipped a run because she was like, well, I missed lunch and I knew I needed to eat. And so I chose to eat, but then it was too late to go running because it was getting dark and blah, blah, blah. And so like I wrote her back and was like, oh, like this is a place where we've had a disconnect, or like I haven't been clear in like helping her understand that like you can train your gut. Like you do not have to run on an empty stomach. And like somehow in her head, coming from a running background, she, like a lot of runners like to run on an empty stomach. Like it just feels better. And by the way, if you're running a 5K, perfect, right? Like it's fine, right? Like run on an empty stomach. But like when you're going for an Ironman or you're transitioning into these long distance events, like to train yourself to be able to run when you've got food in your stomach is like a critical component to Ironman success, right? Like you have to be able to feel this. So we went back and forth and I was like, oh, okay, well, let me dispel that myth for you. Like you can run and it may be really uncomfortable. But I remember, and by the way, I got this advice from Gordo Byrne, who we've talked about before, I think, or at least you and I privately have. I don't know if we've talked about him on this podcast, but he's a wealth of information. And he at one point was talking about in his Ironman build, something he would do is like on purpose, he would go for a long bike ride and then he would come home and drink like a recovery shake, like a high protein, something that would like
Right.
really make him full. Right. And then he would go run and he would be like the first hour of that or the first, at a couple miles were like insanely uncomfortable. And he goes, I would just slow down and like work my way through that. And then eventually I got to the point where it's no big deal. And so then I was like, oh, I'm going to try that too. And so like a couple of the Ironmans that I would do, I would go eat like a big poke bowl, right? Like raw
Nice.
fish and like,
Love it.
right. And
Yeah.
rice and all that and be full, starting my run full. And like the first 2 miles are just insanely uncomfortable. But then like by the end, I'm feeling great. Right. And it was a matter of like teaching your stomach to handle. And so like, if you have it in your head that like, I can't
Can't.
eat and then go run, or I can't eat and then go swim, then like, I'm not saying like start with the poke bowl, but like you could start with something smaller. Right. And like, just to show yourself that like, actually I can,
Yeah.
I don't have to have an empty stomach here. Your gut is as trainable as you want it to be. And if you want to have a gut of steel, then part of it genuinely is like putting yourself in situation with where your stomach is uncomfortable and then talking yourself through that and training through it. Right. And like that is something you can do. And when I told that to my athlete, she was like, oh, that's such an aha. And then like she started doing it and then she ended up doing great in her Ironman. Like she literally had like best case scenario through swim, bike and run. And she fueled herself through it the whole time and, and didn't have stomach issues.
Yeah. The one caveat to that is like if you are trying this, you're like, oh, okay, I'll try that, and you're like having to run to the bathroom because you're getting GI distress, you're hating the runs, whatever. I would say it's not because you can't do it; it's because something is upsetting your GI tract. So there's some underlying health issue or allergy or sensitivity that is preventing you. And in that case, then it's like go to a gastroenterologist, right? Like if you cannot solve it on your own, this allergy or this, and I've had an athlete that had a very sensitive GI tract, and so she ended up going to a gastroenterologist and trying to figure out what it was that was upsetting her stomach, and she ended up doing like the FODMAP, elimination diet. Like it was a lot of work, and it made her training and racing way better. Like what she was putting in her system, and it made her, when we first started working together, she was one of the athletes that couldn't, had to run on an empty stomach, very difficult fueling, but by solving her underlying gut health, allowed her to then fuel with appropriate products at the right better levels, right? Than when if she hadn't done that, right? And it did require her going to a doctor. So just another consideration.
Yeah. And here's another consideration, and this will lead us right into the channel swimming discussion as well. The degree of stress and pressure we feel that we put on ourselves 100% impacts our guts and like the way that our body digests food. So, and this makes sense in like the evolutionary sense, we talk about that, like when we are when in like a high stress situation, our body will divert resources from our stomach and our guts, our intestines, because like it's going to put our resources toward like action and movement, right? So like it can work for you to be stressed. Like maybe you can run a good 5K when you're stressed out, like already you've put a lot of pressure on yourself and you can like handle it and manage it and do reasonably well. So like if you're an athlete that thinks like, no, I do way better when I put tons of stress and pressure on myself, can work for like the shorter distance for some people. But when we start going long, it's really fascinating how stress and pressure and most of the time that's an internal thing, right? Like that's something that like we're putting on ourselves. But if you're trying to like make a time cutoff, if you're trying to, like finish something before or you just feel like I have to finish, it's so important for me to finish this event, and you're putting all this like internal pressure on yourself to do it, the chances of your stomach like behaving the same way that it does when you're in training is very low. And so, and the reason that I say this, because if I'm talking about specifically the channel swimmers that I work with, I have several, and maybe another one coming on, which I'm excited about. What's really fascinating is that there are times that these swimmers, when they're in training, even if they're swimming like 5 hours at a time on a training day, which they do regularly, like twice a month, probably, depending on like where we are, or like where the timing for the channel coming up. But like they will go and train for 5 hours in the ocean swimming straight, right? And they'll bring along somebody, or they'll keep stopping on the shore, to like refill, and they take, fuel with them. And they're very on top of their fueling plan. And it tends to go really, really well in training, right? And then they go to the channel, and it's like the conditions are different, and like the level of stress and pressure is way elevated, right? So they've like paid for the boat captain, and they're trying to get there before dark because the sun's going to go down, or they have to get in, or they're dealing with like these conditions that they haven't dealt with, or like they just feel this like there's only like 20 people that have ever crossed this channel like ever in the history of them, keeping track of it, and I want my name on that list, or like pick the thing, right? Like, and this will apply to like any of your events, but like when you put a ton of stress and pressure on yourself to do the thing, then your body is going to react differently to the food that you're putting in you than it does in training. And so like what we found is that like the level of puking, so like with an athlete that I'm working with, like she's incredible. Like she's got all the things, right? She's super mentally strong. She never has an issue in training. She's not afraid of food. She's gritty. She's all the things. And she gets into a channel, and like 7 hours in, she's puking her guts out. And like when that's happening, right now we're like in new territory. And so we have to figure out something else. Like once that starts happening, and we've figured this out through like trial and error, like once that's happening, she has to switch fuel, right? Like she can't go back then to the same thing that she was drinking and eating before. She has to go to something new. And so your idea of your plan B was so important, because like when I was crewing for her across Kaiwi, and it's whenever she started puking, which was at some point, we literally just switched to, I think we had like a 12-pack of Coke and a 12-pack of Sprite, like just in case, right? Like this is not her primary fuel, but like just in case. And partway through it was like, she was like, I can't drink, her primary fuel source anymore. And she's like, let me try the Coke. And so we tried Coke, like that worked for a little while. Then she started puking up Coke, and she's like, let me try the Sprite. And we literally, for probably the last 6 or 7 hours of the swim, she survived that on Sprite alone. And it was like the only thing that she was going to be able to do.
Yeah.
And like, we totally switched it. And And then what we figured out, and this was an interesting thing because like we really figured out that it was when she was feeling like a time pressure of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which, and so that's the big difference because it was like, why does like the puking almost always, like, I'm not actually sure she's done a channel and didn't puke. Like every channel she pukes. It's never, and we were like, let's try to induce it in training. Like, let's try to put you in a situation where like, in that, cause that way you have an opportunity to practice, right? Cause you can't practice it if you only do how many channels you do a year, right? Like one or two. And so, yeah, like we've tried to like put her under time pressure in training and like, that didn't work either. The last channel she did, she started puking again and she figured out that for her, like she thought she was doing so well. So this is also fascinating because your idea about like eating real food or whole food, she said, my stomach was so good that I thought, oh, it'll be fine. Like I can experiment and take some like real food because she just felt like perfect. So like, and I don't know what kind of like real food she decided to eat. She said she ate that and it immediately came back up and it induced the puking. And so she was like, oh, she goes, what a minute. Like that was such an error. She made a mistake on taking in real food. So like, I get like maybe for swimming, real food is not the way, right? Versus biking, you're sitting up, you're pedaling, like you can eat peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you're not going to puke.
Yeah.
Her training partner though is capable of eating real food. And so like, I don't want to put that out there and say like nobody who swims a channel is capable of eating real food. Like some people are. So again, it's back to the individualized thing of like understanding like what you're going to do, but having like a separate plan or like the plan B, what Mikki was talking about of like an alternative fuel source that you can go to in case of emergency. And then also understanding the degree that stress and pressure plays in how you're going to be able to absorb whatever it is you're taking in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do. I mean, I remember, so I have a stomach of steel as well. And I was able to go do masters, after eating lunch, right? Like maybe not a super heavy lunch, but like usually I could do it. If we did a lot of intensity, I might have regretted that decision, on occasion. But yeah, absolutely. You can train your stomach. I even think with swimming, you can probably train your stomach. And ultimately with your athlete, right? And I think I've experienced this with other athletes. Once you do start puking, it is bad. So you don't want to start, right? Like, but it's not like you can't solve it, right? Like even if because it happens, like a lot of people end up puking, but you have to problem solve it then, afterwards. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I mean, if you are
yeah.
puking, it's likely, like if you think about it in physiological terms, it's your body saying like I'm at my capacity right now. Like I can't take in any more. I need to get rid of this, whatever it is that is in my stomach right now because I'm at capacity. Like I'm not absorbing anymore. And so then you want to go back to go like, all right, what do I have to do to help my body absorb the carbohydrate that I'm taking in? And this is where I'd like to not like switch, but like if we just shift a little bit, we talked before about fluids, right? And making sure that you're hydrated enough. And along with that comes this whole idea of sodium, right? And like how much sodium do we need to take in? And this part, we've talked about it a little bit before in other podcasts, but since we're like specifically talking about fueling and hydration in this one for the long distance, we'll talk about it again. The sodium component is really tricky because there are not like the standard recommendations of, with carbohydrate, we can be pretty much for everyone 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate and then just play around with the type of carbohydrate source, where you're getting it, make sure you have enough fluids. And like for most people, you can experiment with that on its own and figure it out and make it work. With sodium, it varies so much more. And so to understand some physiology that's really important, and this was a giant aha for me, is that the sodium balance is something that your body is going to defend, like, how do I say this? Like for survival, our bodies will go and defend like certain systems. And when it says defend, it means like, I'm going to protect that one. Like it's so important that this system be working properly for survival that I will forego something else in order to maintain equilibrium in this way. And sodium balance is one of those things. Like it is, and it's a really narrow range. I don't know the exact number. I don't think it actually matters, but your brain knows exactly. And what we're talking about is a ratio of sodium and fluids and water, basically, right? And so there's like a sodium concentration that your brain really not just wants, but like needs to have in your bloodstream. And so when you take in excess sodium, you take in more sodium, then what will happen is your body will go, wait, we need more water to make the ratio right. Right. So if it's a percentage, and I'm sorry that I don't know what that percentage is, but whatever it is, when there's more sodium taking in, then it also needs more fluid to make sure that that balance is right. If there's not enough sodium in the blood, like that's where we're talking in like a hyponatremia situation. And it's a super dangerous thing. Like you could have a stroke. Like it's very bad for you physiologically to not have enough sodium. And so that's why if you're sweating a lot, going long in a hot, humid environment, and you're only drinking plain water and you're not taking in enough electrolytes, like you can wash that out. And that's a really bad scenario where your body will stop performing. On the other side of that, it is possible for some people to take in too much sodium. And the reason that I share this is because I think in the last one, but it varies a lot by person. And so like I'm the type of person where like I sweat so much sodium out, and I can also absorb a lot of fluids. And I'm sure that's just years of endurance training that like I can drink an entire 30-ounce bottle of Gatorade, like in 20 seconds. Like I can literally just down the whole thing and I will feel fine. Like my stomach can do that because I have done that before. Like not everybody can or will do that. And if you were to take in a higher amount of sodium and you don't have the fluids to like balance that out either, then your body is going to try to get rid of that sodium, right? So like you'll pee it out, or you'll sweat maybe extra sodium out. Occasionally it could come out like in the form of diarrhea. Like somehow your body's like, I'm going to try to get rid of the sodium, because and as it's doing that, like what it's trying to do is it's trying to keep the percentage right, or like the balance of sodium in fluids. And so if it seems, so there was an athlete that wrote to me yesterday and said, like, I think like she had an experience where she thought she took in too much sodium and her body was rejecting it. And I don't doubt that. She said she took in like 3,000 milligrams of sodium roughly in the course of like a half Ironman, a half marathon, which for her is probably in like 2.5 hours. So it's like more than 1,000 milligrams per hour. So there are like some guidelines, and we'll talk about what those are. But for her, like that was likely too much. It might not have been as bad. So like the advice I would give to this athlete is if you're going to take in that much sodium, it absolutely has to be balanced with enough fluids too, right? So being really careful about like taking salt tablets. Like if it's a salt tablet that comes in a pill form that isn't accompanied by lots of fluid, and so you don't have enough fluids in there, like you can really screw that up by taking in too much without enough fluid, because we want the balance to be right. And so if we were going to give some numbers so that you have some idea of like what is a lot of sodium, what is too much sodium, what is not enough sodium, it's a bare minimum for people who don't, like, it's not that hot, you don't sweat a lot, you're not a really salty sweater, like you're on the low end of that. You could probably get away with something like 250 milligrams of sodium per hour. And that's in a lot of sports drinks, right? So like if you were taking in like a Scotch or like a Gatorade, or normal sports drinks have a little bit of sodium, they kind of have like the minimum amount that a non-salty sweater in a not hot environment can get away with and be fine, and do not need to take in any excess sodium to get through. There are some people who sweat more, and there are some environments that cause you to sweat more, like if it's really hot, where you're losing extra sodium, in which case that replacing more sodium might be really good for you. And so if you think that you're the type of person who might benefit from that, it's something you can experiment with and practice, just like your fueling plan. And so what you might just bump it up to like 500 milligrams per hour, kind of a normal, like in a normal range for a hot endurance event. 500 to 800 milligrams of sodium per hour is reasonable for a lot of people. That's sort of like the middle of the bell curve, right? So like there's some people who can get away with less. There's some people who need more, but the middle of the bell curve is going to be right around like 500 to 800 milligrams of sodium, making sure though that you're taking that like with enough fluid. So you're talking like in a liter of fluid, you've got that much sodium, 500, 600, 700 milligrams in there. That would require going out of your way to do, because most typical products don't have that much sodium, right? Like you would have to choose a product that is specifically like a sodium replacement in order to get that much. And then there's people like me, and I'm not alone, but I would say like we're sort of rare. I mean, maybe like 2 out of 10 athletes are like on this side where it's like, you will really benefit from taking in a lot more sodium. Like I can be taking in 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of sodium per hour, and that would not hurt me. In fact, it would help me, but it would only help me as long as I'm taking in enough fluids. So like if I only took that sodium, but was just sipping on fluids and was super dehydrated, then what's happening, if we go back to our physiology, like my body wants it in my bloodstream, wants the concentration to be right. And so if there's excess sodium in there, I will effectively dehydrate myself, because the body will start pulling fluid from my muscle tissue, because it's like, I don't care about your muscles right now. I care about the sodium concentration in your bloodstream, right? So it's going to start pulling fluid into there. And I'm effectively dehydrating myself by taking in too much sodium and not enough fluid. Like that is sort of a tricky thing to understand. And if you need more specific, like individual information on that, contact me directly. And I'm super happy to like consult with you and talk with you directly about like how you could experiment individually to figure that out for yourself. But it's really important, and it's totally possible to screw up on either end, right? Or you can have like too little and you can have too much. And it's largely tied to like how much total fluid are you taking in, how long, how hot, how hard, all the things. And so there's not like a magic number. And I'm sorry that I can't be like, here's a recommendation across the board for everyone. But that's why it's tricky.
So yeah, I agree. So I don't advise. In fact, I strongly discourage my athletes to do salt tabs and pills. Even so, the only exceptions are if they've done the sodium sweat testing and they've followed through and they've done they've simulated the race environment by doing a trainer ride, weighing themselves before, weighing themselves after, so they understand how much. So you can go get your sweat concentration tested, but that doesn't tell you how much you're sweating, and how much you're sweating may depend on the environment. So some people might not be acclimated to heat and humidity, right? If you're coming from Colorado, I sweat buckets when I go to Hawaii because I'm not used to the humidity. So you want to simulate, and it's a simulation, right? Like you cannot mimic the conditions to a T. But say if you're going to go race in a hot environment, you'll set your trainer up in the bathroom, turn the hot water on, get it steamy and humid, right? I mean, you want to be scientific about it, right? Don't go measure when you're training in 30 degrees in your garage, right? That's not telling you how much you're going to sweat, in this environment. So that's a caveat. I usually, for my athletes that have done the sweat sodium testing and they know how much they're sweating, or likely given the environment, the best we can simulate it, then I'll have them do like the concentrated drinks, like the scratch hyper solution. I can't remember what it's called now.
Mm.
That way, at least if you're mixing it correctly in those concentrations, you're hopefully getting enough of the hydration. But I've seen way too many athletes end up with GI distress after taking salt tabs and doing the pills. While we can't always say it was that, but like then they've had other races where they didn't do that, had the same fueling, and didn't get GI distress. And it's like, okay, well, it's a lot of salt in that little tiny thing. I think it's better for sodium, like you said, right? Like your body wants to stay in the right ratio. Giving it a huge dose of something, right, is hard on the system. And yeah, it's going to absolutely draw fluid out of your cells. And the same goes, and this is going back a little bit to, well, not a little bit, but it's going back to the fueling. People end up sometimes getting GI distress from gels because they aren't taking in a lot of the old gels required you to take it with water. And if you get dehydrated and you're still taking on gels, it's going to pull, like your guts need hydration. It needs water to digest that concentrated thing, and so if you are not hydrated enough, it's continuing to pull fluid into your intestines so it can digest, then yeah, you're dehydrating yourself even more, and that often ends up going badly. Which again, for really long events, I have traditionally recommended a fuel source that's a little bit more like choose, or, to be honest, for the bike, I've always recommended bars. It tends to work better for most athletes. I have I have athletes that can do 70.3s liquid fueling and the gels, but usually when we move up to Ironman and you're talking like 10 plus hours, most of them end up with GI distress when they go with total liquid calories and gels versus having something like a chewable, like a bar or a chomp on board. And absolutely the same for ultra racing. So, yeah.
It's interesting when you mentioned the salt tabs, and it reminded me, and I had forgotten about this, but it makes so much sense. So if we think about how our bodies, like with all of this, it's like working with your body. And if you're in tune and you can hear and feel like signals from your body will largely tell you what it wants or needs in the moment, right? And so, like, if you're doing an Ironman and you go through an aid station at mile 16 and they have chicken broth and you're like, huh, that actually sounds good. And you take a sip of chicken broth
Yeah.
and it tastes like incredible to you, and you're like, oh, this is like an elixir of the gods, right? And you're like drinking the like chicken broth, like that's a sign that your
Mm-hmm.
body wants and needs more sodium.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're like, if that tastes good to you, if you're craving, if you look at like potato chips or the pretzels, you're like, oh, I just want to like suck that salt off the pretzels, that tasted so good.
You probably
That
do.
is a sign that like your body, like it wants that. And so you can, through craving, and it can be a similar thing with Coke. Like you drank a Coke in an aid station, you're like, oh, it was so good. It was like that Coke was saving my life. Then you're like, yeah, that's a sign that your body wanted sugar at that time. And so being able to listen to like the tasting of it, and therein lies the issue with your salt tab, is that you swallow the sodium without letting your brain like taste it. So like when it's on your tongue and you can taste the sodium, then your brain is registering that like, oh, okay, I've got sodium on board. And it's going to like do all of its recalculations about, like, like what the concentration is going to be. And it allows your brain to understand what it is you're taking on better than like swallowing a pill that has a bunch of sodium in it that goes straight to your gut, but your brain didn't register at first. And like maybe it does later. I don't know how all that works. I won't pretend that I do. But if there's more issue with like swallowing salt tabs instead of tasting the salt, because if
Mm-hmm.
you taste the salt and it tastes good to you, keep doing the salt. If you taste the salt and you're like, oh my God, it was terrible. Like I did not want that at all. Right. And your body's saying like, nope. And like, I just wanted fluid. Like, oh, the water tasted so good to me. Yeah. Cause your body's trying, you already have too much sodium on board. Your body wants more water. So really paying attention to like what it is that tastes and feels good to you to ingest is going to go a lot, like probably further than anything Mikki and I said today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And
That's your own internal, and like trust yourself in like your body and your gut in those situations, that if something tastes good to you and you like it, eat it and drink it while you're training.
yeah, I totally agree. There's so much that we try to and it's good. Like we're both, scientifically minded, right? Like figuring out what you think you're going to need based on the intensity, based on the length of time, have your plan A, plan B, maybe a plan C, worst case scenario. But then, yeah, when it comes down to it, if I'll, within ultra running, someone's got a pizza out. I've had athletes say, I really want a piece of that. My kid has a piece of pizza. I really want that. Okay, eat the pizza, right? Like, because in some, as long as you're not going to be scaling something and you're going to send your heart rate up into like threshold. But a lot of times, in this case, it was like they're probably going to start jogging, power hiking. You can digest a pizza when you're jogging, power hiking, right? Like that's not a problem for most people. I shouldn't say it's not a
Depending.
problem.
Yeah.
Depending. Okay. Um, so
There's some
yeah,
people who are like puking right now
yes,
listening to us.
but yeah, I mean, but then you think, yeah, you can train your gut. I mean, back in the 80s, right, with
You
the Iron
can.
Wars, like they were eating hamburgers on the bike, so don't, and they were going fast, much faster than most of you guys listening, myself included, as an age grouper, far faster than I could ever dream of going on hamburgers and other such things. So, yeah. Anything else? What
Yeah.
else? I feel like we've
Yeah.
got
No, I feel like we covered it. I think that's probably about it. So like if we just reiterate 60 to 90 grams of carbs per, like your basic plan to start,
mhm,
60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour, read the labels, mix up your different sugars. If there's a product that doesn't work for you, look at what kind of sugar is in it, try a different kind of sugar. Don't assume that all sugar is bad because that one product that had the sugar that made you upset, like didn't work for you. Set out with enough fluids that like is in in relation to how long you're going, how hot it is, and how hard you're working. And then experiment with sodium, knowing that sodium requirements vary, but like at the middle of the bell curve is like 500 to 800 milligrams of sodium per hour, along with your fluids. You can start there and probably be pretty safe with that. And then keep experimenting and be open to training your gut and trying different things when the opportunity suggests it, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
was your too long do not read.
Yeah, right. Skip to the end. No, yeah, and yeah, have a plan B and maybe plan C, and then, um, just know that, you have to fuel to get from point A to point B. Unless, I mean, there are those that have done like huge metabolic efficiency, fat burning development, right? But they've spent years developing it. And I think there's some evidence to suggest that while they may need less, it's not something that they can just do within a few months, right? And I'm not going to say that isn't a path for someone. So I have athletes that have struggled with the fueling and they want to become more metabolically efficient, which means staying more in your fat burning zones. And so for some athletes into Ironman and certainly for ultras, like, yes, that is possible. 5Ks, like, you're going to be at a high intensity. I mean, I guess you could do a 5K in your fat burning zone, but it's an easy jog, right?
Yeah. You wouldn't
So,
perform well. If you want
right,
to
you wouldn't
perform
perform.
well, like carbohydrates are required, period.
Right, right. And so, but again, that's testing. It's your daily nutrition and adjusting that. It is a little bit of training adjustments as well. Uh, and then yeah, but I don't know where I was going with that. Other than, you know, there's not one solution for everyone, I guess, is what I guess the add on to that, and experiment. Oh, that's what it was. If you're going to go really long, experimenting or having in your plan B or C real food. I think I've not seen too many of athletes I've crewed or coached, or even my own adventures in the backcountry, where sitting down and having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich didn't ultimately make my run a lot better, right? As opposed
Hmm.
to continue to shovel in the sugar, which
Hmm.
sometimes real food just is just what the body needs. So
Yeah. I
that's
thought
all.
of one more
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
I have one more thing, and we'll end on this. But here are some like physiological signs from your body if you're trying to figure out, like, do I need more carbohydrate or do I need more fluids? Right. So, like, just, and this is a troubleshooting thing for you. If you're watching heart rate, which like hopefully you are, right? Like most of us should be, like, and you get to know like what is a normal heart rate for you for like a certain power on the bike or a certain pace. But if you feel like you're working pretty hard and your heart rate's not going up,
That's
then like your heart rate's just lower than it feels like it should be, but the effort feels harder, then in all likelihood, you're low on carbohydrates, and taking in more carbohydrates will help you. And if you think about the physiology behind that, it's like in order for your heart to like be stimulated to beat harder, the stimulus for that comes from like muscle contraction and like muscles working hard. And in order for the muscle to work hard, it needs the appropriate fuel. So if the muscle's low on fuel, then the muscle's not going to contract and relax to the same degree that it would if it had more fuel, which means that it's not going to ask the heart to beat faster. But it doesn't mean you're still trying to work hard, but like you physiologically, like you can't, your heart rate's low. Try more carbohydrates in that scenario. You're likely to be able to like push yourself harder once you have more carbohydrate. Alternatively, if you feel like you know what your normal heart rate should be for a given pace of power and it's higher than it feels like it should be, like you're like, normally my heart rate would be 140 here, now it's 152, this is weird, try hydration. Like, it's in all likelihood you are dehydrated. And if you think about that in terms of blood volume, when you're dehydrated, your blood volume goes down, which means that your heart has to pump faster in order to distribute blood to your body when your blood volume is lower. So if you can increase your blood volume by drinking more fluids, then you can, in all likelihood, bring your heart rate back to sort of normal. So again, to summarize that, heart rate's low, effort's high, eat more. Heart rate's high, effort's high, or effort's not as high as it feels like it should be. Try drinking more and see how that goes. And then I just thought of one more thing. I said that was the end. It's not. There's always one more thing with me.
there is.
if you're grumpy and you're like, this is
Yeah.
stupid, right? Like, I hate this. Like, I don't care about this. This is stupid. I don't want to try anymore. Like, why do people care about this at all? Like, it's likely a low sugar situation that your brain is figuring out. And your brain's like, I don't know if we're going to make it to the end of this. And so I need to find a way to shut this down. So let's decrease motivation. So if you start thinking this is stupid, I don't want to do this anymore. And then like you finish or you quit hypothetically, because this has happened, right? Like you jam up because you're like, that was dumb. Or you finish, but you didn't like try that hard to get to the end. And then you finish and you drink a Coke. And then later you're talking to your friends or your family and you're like, why didn't I try harder? I'm so mad at I didn't try harder. Because as soon as you got the Coke in on board, right? Then your brain went into like, okay, now we have everything on board and like we can push again. And then you're mad at yourself because you didn't try hard enough. Like in all likelihood, that was a low feeling situation as well. So those are ways to like kind of help figure out for yourself if you're low on fuel and it's not a fitness thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's always in my previous calls as a reminder to athletes. And some athletes are more prone to negativity. Let's just be real. Just like human, we're a subset of the human population. However, I try to encourage everyone that when the real negative thoughts come into your brain to assess, like, do you need to eat something? And I know I've said this before on the podcast, but some of the best feedback I got from my geology students when I used to teach field geology, and these were big days out in the field, 8 to 10 hours, hard hiking up in Montana, and they're thinking hard, right? And when you combine hard physical activity with hard mental activity, yeah, the brain drain is real and the fatigue is real. And I always told the students, if you start to feel really sad and really frustrated about, your geologic map or where you're at, in the strat column or whatever, sit down on the rock, have a cookie, right? And they
Yeah.
said, over many years, students would say that was the best advice any of the teachers gave me because it literally changed my outlook and my attitude, and I could get up and keep mapping for another 5 hours, or whatever it was. And it's
Hmm.
true, like we need calories to be able to perform physically and mentally, and they're tied together. When our blood sugar drops, right, we start to feel really sad. So yeah,
Yeah, our brain runs on carbohydrates just like our
right,
muscles do, right? So like your brain runs on carbohydrates. In these long endurance events, like part of the challenge is to be able to continuously make good decisions for 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 17 hours. Like I need to be able to think clearly and make good decisions. Commonly what happens is you miss a feed or you didn't eat enough and then you start making poor decisions and then you miss the next feed and before you know it you're so far off track that like now you can't perform the way that you could. So yeah, being able to make a decision knowing that your brain runs on carbohydrates too. And so this is why like we are not afraid of sugar when we're training hard,
right,
right?
yeah,
So we can end
absolutely.
on that.
It is not the time to try to work on your weight loss when you're in an endurance event. Do that
It's
outside of
not,
your
it's
event.
not. Yeah.
Well, and next
All
time
right.
we are going to chat about if you are a triathlete that's thinking of making the transition to ultra running or ultra events. I've got athletes that are doing a lot more ultra cycling events, running events. I don't have any swimmers that are taking on the big swim challenges like your athletes are, but we're going to talk about, what does that training look like, and does it change? Do you need more? Do you need less? Do you need different? And some of the considerations around making that transition. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Thanks, Michelle. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care. Bye.